Attorney General, I can't hear you.
Oh, okay. Let me unmute.
Yeah. Now you're unmuted. You're unmuted.
Okay. Sorry for being late. It's kind of a hectic period in my life.
I can well imagine. We have a lot of intrepid people who have remained on, and it's being recorded anyway, so others will be able to see it as time goes along. I already did the intro, so let's get down to the main event. So today we're honored to have as our first guest on the Community Relations Corner, the Honorable Tisha James, Attorney General of the state of New York. Tish is the first woman, the first person of color to ever hold the office of Attorney General in our state. And we're so happy that you've joined us for this momentous launch. As I said, this is the first of these community relations corners that we're producing, and we really very much wanted to have you as our first guest. I've had the pleasure of knowing Letitia James since she was elected in 2003, started serving in 2004 as a city councilwoman for the 35th Councilmanic District in the heart of Brooklyn. And then 10 years later, she was elected as public advocate in 2014. And in 2015, I had the absolute pleasure of accompanying the public advocate on a mission to Israel, on a trip to Israel in the spring of 2015, something we might get into in the course of our conversation. But first things first, how are you doing during the course of this pandemic, your staff, your greater family? How are things going?
So, like everyone else, we've had to adapt, and most of the staff of the Office of Attorney General is working remotely from home. We do have communication with the entire staff. I try to make sure that we all stay connected. The courts, as you know, during that period of when we were at its peak, the courts closed. Most of our work is related to the courts. And so when the courts closed, basically what we were trying to do is catch up with a lot of our legal work, try to refine our processes, communicate with one another. How can we improve upon what we are doing throughout the state of New York, and just checking in on one another.
That's good. I think that's an important thing to do. We do it at JCRC, and I'm sure many others do it as well. I think one of the things that we want to do on this community relations corner is really get to know who our public officials are. So what can you tell us about yourself, where you were born, where you were raised, and why you decided to go into politics? I saw in Wikipedia that you went to Lehman College, which is walking distance from where I grew up. In fact, I even took a couple of courses at Lehman. It's quite a schlep from Brooklyn. But anyway, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
So let me just say that also, during this pandemic, we've had to deal with hundreds of individuals who've had complaints and issues related to who's essential, who's not essential. Obviously, we've been enforcing the executive orders, working with the governor and drafting those executive orders and responding to the needs of constituents. And that basically sums up who I am. I, for a very long time, have been responding to the needs of individuals who need government assistance, who need to get past the quagmire of government and the bureaucracy of government. And so as a city council member, I did that. Even before that, as a staff attorney in the state legislature, I did that. I did that as a city council member, as a public advocate, and now as Attorney General, responding to the needs of others. That's really who I am, and it really speaks to my raison d'etre, my reason for being, and that is recognizing that I've been blessed and I need to turn around and bless others.
Thank you. Is that how you would define yourself as Attorney General, as the people's attorney? How, if asked, as I'm asking you, how would you define your role as AG?
So the Office of Attorney General is the people's lawyer by definition. And so it's important that we respond to individual complaints, that we respond to individuals during this pandemic, people who are socially isolated, people who might be the victims of price gouging, people who might be subject to scams. There's all types of scams that are online. There are individuals who are knocking on people's door, basically saying that they have all of these cures to COVID-19. There are individuals who are also taking advantage of vulnerable and marginalized populations, including seniors, offering them assistance in exchange for money. And so the Office of Attorney General should be there to respond to their needs and to make sure that we prosecute those who want to take advantage of individuals during this crisis. And the office basically is really committed to a simple concept, and that is justice and serving others.
Well, what's the most memorable of the complaints that you've dealt with since you've been elected as AG?
So we've get, like, for instance, during the beginning of the pandemic, it was price gouging related to essential goods. Now it's changed. We have seen price gouging now of food, eggs in particular, meat in some cases. And so we are dealing with the price gouging. We're dealing with complaints related to the price gouging of food. And in fact, we brought a major case most recently against a distributor of eggs. We also had a meeting with supermarkets all across the city of New York who indicated that we needed to look at the line of distribution and perhaps look at manufacturers as opposed to retailers. And in fact, this one particular case was a distributor who had increased his prices for eggs at least 20-fold. And we brought a case against him, and ultimately we settled that case, and we were able to get some sort of compensation for individuals who unfortunately have been the victim of price gouging.
If any of our participants and any of our viewers or listeners would experience a price gouging situation, what should they do?
We have a 1-800 hotline number that they can reach out to us, to our office at any point in time, and speak to some of our advocates on the phone on a wide range of issues. We have a 1-800 hotline number for individuals who might be victims of all types of scams, price gouging. We also have a 1-800 number for anyone who might be a victim of a hate crime. And so we're a full service office. And even though some of us are working remotely from home, we still have individuals who report to work each and every day. And they are basically there to serve.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure our participants thank you as well. I just want to shift to something now more contemporary and more societal in regard to the killing of George Floyd. We were very honored for you to participate in our space of listening and healing back in June. And we just think it's very important for us in the Jewish community to build bridges and open lines of communication, build bridges to and open lines of communication with members of the Black community, that's African American, Caribbean American, African, et cetera. And you told a story then about your nephew who was stopped and frisked, and that really made an impression on many of us. I very much would like for you, if you would, to repeat that for our participants today.
So my nephew, who considers me his favorite aunt, even though I know he lies because he also tells my sister the same thing. He was in college and he decided to come visit me. He lived in Delaware. And so he was visiting me for a summer vacation. And he drove through Brooklyn and he was stopped and he was frisked. And when he came to my house, he was crying. And this is a young man who was around, I guess, 20, 21. And he balled up in a fetal position and he just cried. And he said, "Auntie, I did nothing wrong." And he told me what happened. And he said he had never been humiliated in such a fashion, never disrespected in such a fashion. And he was subjected to all of that simply because he was Black and a male. And it was during the period when police officers were basically abusing the stop and frisk practices in the city of New York. And as you know, Mr. Miller, I, along with others, were plaintiffs in that litigation because our family members, my nephew, was subjected to that. My dentist was subjected to that. Some of my members of the clergy were subjected to stop and frisk. And we all know that the vast majority of the individuals who were stopped did absolutely nothing wrong, and that only a small minority of individuals were actually arrested, and a small percentage of guns were ever recovered. And it did not do anything to keep us safe. In fact, what it did do was continue to exasperate the growing tensions between the police and communities of color. And so I'm glad that policy is behind us. And I'm glad that the police department recognizes that what we really should be focusing on, as I've mentioned previously, is gangs. And the fact is that a small minority of individuals are committing most of the crime. And what we really need to do is heal, and we need to improve upon the relationship between police and communities of color because we rely upon one another. And when that trust is broken, it's obviously going to have an impact on how we police and keep our communities safe. I have a lot of neighbors, a lot of nosy neighbors, and these nosy neighbors would love to reach out to the police and tell them what they see each and every day. But if that relationship has been broken, my nosy neighbors are just going to close their windows and keep it to themselves. And I don't want that to happen. I want them to be nosy. I want them to continue to keep an eye out on me and everyone else in my community. And I want that for the entire city of New York. And in fact, I want that for the entire nation. I want us to heal.
And thank you. And what should we do in New York with regard to policing to ensure that there is healing and that the wound is closed and repaired?
We've got to repeal. We have to heal the breach, and so we've got to get to know one another, which is why I appreciate JCRC having this community relations corner and continuing to engage in dialogue with the African American community. And as we continue to share our experiences, and as we continue to worship with one another, and as I continue to bring others to travel to Israel with me and with you, so that we can basically know our shared history and our shared experience, and also at the same time, respect our differences. That's what we really need to do. If we're going to, again, heal the breach and heal the relationship and come out as one, as we once did all throughout history, we need to know one another. And the best way to do it is to have conversations such as this.
Well, thank you for that as well. I also want to thank you. I know that our president, Cheryl Fishbein, is watching as well. And she and I walked across the Brooklyn Bridge together on a very cold Sunday on January the 5th from Lower Manhattan into Cadman Plaza in our No Hate, No Fear demonstration. More than 25,000, we think more than 50,000 people. We did this together with the UJA Federation and a lot of other organizations, but particularly UJA. And you were there right at the front of the line, but that's marching with our feet. What else might we need to do? We've had tensions between the Black and Jewish communities. We had partnerships for many years during the civil rights movement, but then there was a moving away one from the other. Is there anything that you might want to suggest that we engage in actively to ensure the bond between our two communities is inseparable?
So, I remember, as a former city council member, we created an organization, and I'm trying to remember the name of the organization, where we sat down and we engaged in dialogue, we engaged in community events, and we kept the peace in our community. And I am so proud to say that during my tenure as a city council member, where we walked the streets together, we policed the streets together, we had joint events together, and we even oftentimes we worshiped together. And that went a long way, again, in addressing some of the stereotypes and some of the differences that we may have had. In addition to that, telling our story and educating individuals about history. And as you mentioned about the civil rights struggle and how, it was also Jewish blood that was shed for my freedom and the freedom of countless number of other African Americans, and how Jews respected Blacks and how they allowed them to shop at their taverns and at their stores, and how they allowed them to come through the front door. And so we need to tell those stories, and we need to talk about our similarities. And we need not to shy away. And whenever there is an incident, what we need are individuals on the ground who are truly peacemakers, who can bring communities together and who can provide peace in the community. That's what we need more of. Individuals such as Richard Green in Crown Heights, who's been a peacemaker for a very, very long time. He's highly respected in Crown Heights and beyond. He has done a lot to heal the breach. And so I'd like to model myself after Richard Green.
I think that that's a great role model. I want to get back to this in a second, but I just want to mention that we do have a sponsor for this Community Relations Corner program, and that's the Free Synagogue of Flushing. And just to read this for our listening and watching audience, this episode of the Community Relations Corner is sponsored by the Free Synagogue of Flushing, serving the Reformed Jewish community in Queens, New York for over a century. Visit freesynagogueflushing.org to view its magnificent stained glass sanctuary and immerse yourself in a piece of Queens Jewish history. All are invited to join for a wide array of programming and webinars, and the beautiful sanctuary, social hall, and meditation garden are available for rental to add to your joyous occasions. Check freesynagogueflushing.org, one word, freesynagogueflushing.org, to learn more about Sabbath, Shabbat, and high holiday services and weekly Sunday school. Once again, please visit freesynagogueflushing.org. And frankly, Attorney General, will be a great place for you to visit one of these days. Now that you're a statewide official, Queens is no longer what it was when you were a city council member out of Brooklyn. I still remember those comments.
And I can't wait. I would love to go see their stained glass windows.
Okay, well, we'll make that arrangement.
Okay.
But we were talking about the relationship between Jews and Blacks. There are two people whom I've heard you say very warm things about out of Crown Heights. So one of them is my longtime dear friend, Deborah Halbostan.
Yes.
And the other is a real leader and character in Crown Heights, Hanina Sperlin. So why don't you please share, we're getting a little personal here, but why don't you please share with our listening and viewing audience your relationship with those two individuals?
Well, since you called him character, it wasn't me, it was you. I'll use that word. He is a character, but he's like my brother. He's the only one that could like yell at me, and then I could yell at him, and then we go and we go to an event together. I do consider him my brother. We go back at least 20 years. Wow. And Kanina has been to so many meetings within the African-American community, the Caribbean community. He is respected by all. He's very understanding, and he has an open heart. And Deborah Halbostan, I was there when she opened the museum. I was a city council member. I assisted her in getting resources to build that beautiful, beautiful museum, which now is a place where individuals can go to resolve their differences and can learn about the Jewish experience. And it's so critically important. I consider her, we go shoe shopping together. She gives me hints on purchasing high heels, even though I can't wear those high heels as well as she does.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Deborah second. Because they're going to transition into something that was so high on our agenda. We mentioned it before, the March Across the Brooklyn Bridge and the battle against anti-Semitism. This is a battle which has been going on for millennia. And back in the end of 2019, the rate of anti-Semitic incidents was just unfathomable. It's very, very painful. And of course, nearby in Jersey City, there was a murder, and up in Muncie, New York, first a slashing and it evolved into a murder. And just in the city itself, particularly in Brooklyn, in areas that you once represented as a city council member in Crown Heights, as well as in Williamsburg, and Borough Park and other places, many too many incidents of anti-Semitism. what role should or can an attorney general play in stemming anti-Semitism? COVID stepped in February, March, and people then remained indoors. So acts of hatred abated. But it doesn't mean that when COVID is then resolved, that these acts of hatred are not going to reappear. And I'm talking about hatred against everyone, not just against the Jewish community, but we in the Jewish community clearly are hypersensitive in regard to anti-Semitism.
You know, you're absolutely right. You know, we talked about Deborah Halbostan, and the Jewish Children's Museum came about as a result, as you know, of the assassination of her son, Ari. And so, and we've got a long way to go. And I use the Office of Attorney General, one, to investigate crimes of hate, to focus on again, our expectations as individuals and as citizens, and also to hold individuals responsible for those types of heinous crimes that they commit against the Jewish community. And it's really critically important that we not let up, and that whenever there is an act of hate, that we all come together and stand together, and that we investigate those crimes, and that we ensure that the police department, not only in New York City, but all across the state, take these crimes very serious and investigate them to the fullest extent possible. It is really critically important. But as the Attorney General of the great state of New York, we use the powers of our office to investigate crimes of hate, and to send the message that hate will not be tolerated, not only in New York City, but all across the state of New York. And we must step up our efforts after COVID-19, again, to let individuals know that hate will not be tolerated in the state and or in the city, and that if anyone commits it, then this Attorney General will go after them with the full power of the law.
Well, thank you. I know that you're not the Commissioner of Education, but isn't education, particularly about symbols and history, isn't that crucial in stemming the tide of hatred, particularly against the Jewish community? What, as to the Black community, what a noose represents, and to the Jewish community, what a swastika represents, we have a lot of work to do to ensure, particularly that our young people know what those symbols are and how hatred against one person can very easily lead to hatred against someone else.
Absolutely right. And it should be incorporated into our school system as part of the curriculum. It's really critically important that symbols, again, what they represent and what they mean and how hurtful they can be, from the swastika to the noose, to a Confederate flag. It's really critically important that individuals understand the history of these symbols, but not only just these symbols, but the history of the Jewish experience, just as individuals need to know about the experience of African Americans. It's really critically important that it be part of the curriculum in every public school all throughout this country. If we're going to really heal the relationship and make sure that we understand one another and recognize our common experience, and how Jews have been there for us in our experience, how we must be there for them in their experience, and in particularly at a time when they're being victimized.
Well, thank you. One of the things that I think that we can do together, and I know that you can with the power that's vested in you as the Attorney General, is deal with gun violence.
Yeah.
And I know that everyone who is on this call is aware of what is happening on the streets of America's cities, in our own city. And we're kind of at a loss as to how to address this issue. But you being in the position that you're in, not only can address it, but come up with formulas to ensure that gun violence is terminated. So what is it, Attorney General, that can be done from your perspective in your position?
So we have a bureau within our office that investigates gun trafficking. And so we, again, engage in prosecution of individuals who are responsible for gun trafficking, which in most cases is related to drug sales as well. In addition to that, we have also filed amicus briefs or led lawsuits to protect the state's interest. In addition to that, we've educated the general public with regards to legislation that has been passed in Albany with regards to gun safety, and in regards to laws in the state of New York with respect to possession, and other legislation to keep constituencies safe. We've engaged in some gun buybacks in not only in the city, but all throughout the state of New York. And we work with a number of organizations, basically to educate individuals about all of these horrific crimes that have been committed most recently, and how all of us must work together to ensure that we have responsible laws that are in place to protect constituents and protect the interest of New Yorkers and of all Americans in the aftermath of so many horrific crimes, from the crime at the synagogue in Pennsylvania to in California, to the Pulse. The list goes on and on and on. And so we must do more in this country to pass reasonable and responsible gun laws in this country to keep communities safe. And I just thank your organization and so many other organizations and joining with me over the years to try to, again, address and eradicate gun violence in our country.
Yeah, and that's so crucial, so vital, so important. We, in partnership with UJA, Federation of New York, created a community security initiative. You know, who would have thought that in the 21st century that we would need to create a security initiative for the Jewish community? But all of our institutions, about 2,000 Jewish institutions in New York, are vulnerable. Many of us are vulnerable as well, particularly those of us who wear Jewish paraphernalia, whether it's a yarmulke, it's a kippah, or it's a Jewish star, or women who wear wigs. We've all been targeted through the course of our lives one way or another. And the best way that I think that we have of ensuring our own safety, not only is taking matters into our own hands, but partnering with others who are not Jewish in New York to speak as one, against hate, against violence, against bigotry, against prejudice. And I know that having stood together with you at all too many press conferences, remember one in particular on a street corner in Crown Heights, it just is wonderful to know that there are individuals such as yourself, not just such as yourself, as yourself, who are ready at every turn to stand together with others of different faiths, of different ethnicities, of different complexions. That's what makes New York so great, of having public officials such as yourself in the position that you are in.
And I can recall after some incidents when I was a member of the city council, where I was an honorary member of the Jewish caucus, and we all came together to ensure that there was monies in the budget to provide security to synagogues all throughout the city of New York. And we were able to achieve that and get those additional resources, and that went a long way in keeping those institutions safe. And I'm really proud of that fact.
Yeah, no, that's very important. And we at JCRC believe in building coalitions, and a coalition we're going to be building in our community leadership, a Center for Community Leadership, is a coalition around security in the non-Jewish community, to share the best practices that we have in the Jewish community with churches and mosques and temples and other religious institutions, so that we're not only protecting ourselves, we're assisting others in protecting their property as well.
Right.
I want to transition. I mentioned it at the outset introducing you, in terms of how long I've known you, about the trip to Israel. From your experience in Israel as an elected official, how does traveling to the country enhance your work and understanding of U.S.-Israel relations?
Well, you know the story. It was you and I. We went to Israel. And I'll always remember this because it was like it was as if it was yesterday. And that is, we went to a part of Israel where there was a lot of hostility, and you can feel the tension in the air. And I can recall, for some reason, I stayed back in the bus because I wanted to either change my shoes or something. And you stayed back in the bus as well. But what I noticed, because you were seated in front of me, was that you removed your yarmulke and you put on a wool hat. And I looked at you and I said, it's like 99 degrees outside. Why are you putting on a wool hat? And you looked at me with this serious look in your face, very solemn. And you said, Tish, we can't wear our yarmulkes here. And I said, what do you mean? We're in Israel. That's who you are. It's a symbol of who you are. It's like, it's a part of you. And you said, no, Tish, you emphasized it. We cannot wear our yarmulkes here. We're not safe. And then I looked outside and I saw some individuals who presented threats to you and to my Jewish brothers and sisters. And I got it. And you didn't have to say any more. And that bothered me because as a Black woman, it's the color of my skin. People dislike me because of the color of my skin. People may call me the N-word because of the color of my skin. It was at that point where there was a bond, there was a connection. The same people who hate you hate me. And as a result of that, I must stand with you. And it was, that cemented the entire trip. That's all I needed to really experience. And it was at that point in time that my love for Israel and my commitment to the cause of peace was solidified. And that's why I look forward to going back to Israel with you and with others, again, to widen and broaden my experience because I'm still learning.
So I think I know the answer to this question, but what was your reaction to the Democratic Socialists of America questionnaire for city council members? And how would have you reacted back in 2003 when you were running your campaign if a questionnaire came and said with a pledge, we're not going to get our endorsement unless you pledge never to travel to Israel, and it was very specific that it was really the trips that JCRC has taken, or that you support the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, the BDS movement against Israel. Otherwise, you won't get our support. What's your reaction to that?
I was offended by the question, and there was a lot of pushback on the question, and I'm glad. That question should not have been on the questionnaire. And if it had been on the questionnaire when I was a candidate for city council, I would not have sought their support. And now, as the Attorney General of the state of New York, it's important that organization understand why individuals go to Israel because of what I just described and because of that common experience. And so they've backtracked. And I just really want to thank this organization and countless others for bringing it to the attention of so many candidates who reached out to me. At least 5 candidates reached out to me and said, what would Tish have done? And I told them just what I just told you.
Well, thank you very much for that. And speaking about public affairs, the census is upon us. Why is it, well, first of all, that's the other way around. Why are people not signing on to the census form? It's simple. I did it in less than 10 minutes. And why is it so important that we sign on to that form and provide the information to the federal government?
10 questions, 10 minutes of your life. So as you know, the Office of Attorney General, we had to go to court. We went to the United States Supreme Court to remove the citizenship question, which has had a chilling effect on immigrants and others from filling out the census. The census requires that we enumerate all individuals regardless of their immigration status. Everyone counts, and therefore everyone matters, and therefore everyone should be counted. The United States Supreme Court agreed with us because the Constitution is silent on the issue of citizenship for the purposes of enumeration and for the purposes of reapportionment. And so as a result of that, the Supreme Court agreed with us, and we are now trying to get the word out and engaging outreach and education to all communities, that the census is really critically important to the number of representatives that we have in Congress. And two, it's related to how much money, resources that we receive from Washington, D.C. Right now, our response rate in New York State is around 60%, 62, 63. We need to do better than that.
Yeah.
There was, at a time, we had 45 congressional representatives in Washington. We are now down to 27. There's a possibility, if we don't increase the census count, there's a possibility that we may lose maybe 1 or 2 congressional seats, and we could ill afford to lose any representatives in Congress. And so, again, it's tied to reapportionment and it's tied to resources. And so it's so important that everyone fill out the census, and it's so important that we let everyone know that their information is confidential and that all individuals should fill out their census. We're in court again because this administration now wants to use the data from undocumented immigrants to discount them from the apportionment base, which again is in violation of the law. We're in court now. There was a hearing last week. We believe the decision that we hope and anticipate that we will receive a favorable disposition similar to what the Supreme Court held. But it's important that individuals just take 10 minutes out of their day to fill out these 10 questions, and tell your neighbors and your friends and individuals who are part of your network to do the same.
Thank you. You're absolutely correct. We have been engaging in outreach into intra-communal, into the Jewish community to try to push the census form that we fill it out and we submit it. And we also have, through our Center for Community Leadership, outreach into the non-Jewish world as well. Census is really very high on our agenda too. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to give another sense of who Letitia James is. We talked about the trip to Israel, and you mentioned that one very searing experience. But there was another experience that I recall very, very vividly. And we were in Shabbat, we were in Jerusalem, we were at the Mamila Hotel. And my tradition is that I bring my children in Israel to join us for Shabbat. And at that time I had one daughter, a husband, and I think she had 5 children then, I don't remember. Now she has, she had 4 children then, she has 6 now. And then another daughter just made Aliyah a summer ago, just a year ago, herself, her husband, and her 2 kids moved to Israel. Anyway, but the daughter who was there with her kids, that she has this pretty little girl, her name is Priel, blondie, blue eyes. And I still remember Friday night at the Shabbat dinner, you and Priel holding hands. She could have been more than 4 or 5 years old at the time. Just you and her just holding hands and talking to one another, talking to my grandsons as well about what they experienced during the recent war with Hamas and how they had to shelter when the sirens went out. And I love to see in our public officials personal moments where their just personal feelings come out. This is nothing political. This is purely just an innate feeling that you have for family and for kids. And so I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that. I don't know if you wanted to elaborate on it, but that was a very special moment during the course of the trip, aside from all the strategic places that we went to on the northern border and the Gaza Strip, et cetera, et cetera.
It's the innocence of children, through their eyes. So there was a lot of muckety mucks there. I didn't want to talk to them. I just wanted to talk to that little baby girl. And we just bonded and we connected. And children just, I don't know, they gravitate towards me. And that's good, because I want to be reminded of the innocence of their eyes. And I want to fight every day to protect the world and to keep them from harm and to protect their safety. And not to get so caught up in titles that you can't take time to talk to a little girl or a little child about what's on their mind. That to me, that was worth more than, I learned so much more from that little girl. And it just really says a lot about who she is and about her family, that she just wanted to sit down and talk to me and sit next to me at the Shabbat dinner, a complete stranger. And she just wanted me to be her friend. And she was the best friend that I could have met during my trip to Israel. And it's a friend that I cherish. And I look forward to seeing her soon.
Thank you very much, Tish. Well, I had the honor of giving the benediction at the second inauguration, your second inauguration. Of course, it was the mayor's second inauguration too. It was bitter cold. And at the end, when I finally got up to give my invocation, my grandchildren in Israel, 7 hours ahead, were watching. They told me afterwards that it wasn't just seeing me that they got excited about. They call me Saba, which is grandpa in Hebrew. But when they saw you, hey, there's a Tish James. They got very excited. So the bond that you created with Priel is still alive and well today. And the bond that we in the Jewish community have created with you is still very much alive and well. I can't thank you enough for being our first guest on the Community Relations Corner of the JCRC of New York. It's really been a pleasure, as it always is, speaking with you, schmoozing with you, as we would say in English. You must be used to that expression in Crown Heights and elsewhere. And I also want to thank our sponsor. The episode of the Jewish Relations Corner is sponsored by the Free Synagogue of Flushing, serving the Reformed Jewish community in Queens, New York for over a century. Visit freesynagogueflushing.org to view its magnificent stained glass sanctuary, as the Attorney General said that she would, and immerse yourself in a piece of Queens Jewish history. All are invited to join for a wide array of programming and webinars, and the beautiful sanctuary, social hall, and meditation garden are available for rental to add to your joyous occasions. Check out freesynagogueflushing.org to learn more about the Shabbat, the Sabbath, and high holiday services and weekly Sunday school. Once again, visit freesynagogueflushing.org and visit freesynagogue.flushing. And thank you again, Attorney General. Our thanks to our audience for joining us live, and for those who are viewing us on tape. I'm Michael Miller, the CEO of JCRC New York, and we look forward to seeing you next time on Community Relations Corner. Shalom, everybody. Thank you very much. And shalom to the Attorney General, to Letitia James.
Take care. Good night.
Good night.